Okay, let's get going. Uh, Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Ray. I'm a digital arts instructor in art, media, and design at Cal State San Marcos. We are very honored to have our guest today, Charmaine Minniefield. I do have a few things to announce before Charmaine starts. Hello, hello. I'm standing in for Melissa Taylor today, who is currently, I believe, on a plane. Her class, AMD 380, Visionary Artists of Color, is a host for the speaker series that we're Resounding Visions. AMD 380 explores the work and lived experiences of BIPOC artists in the contemporary art world and focuses on themes, representation, and issues that specifically affect BIPOC artists. The course that I teach is AMD 308. It's also a host of the speaker series. We mostly focus on the workshops. This course is designed to give you an appreciation for sound and understanding of audio art, an introduction to sound design for film, video, podcasting, and basic training in audio recording and mixing. So please take it next semester. We offer every semester. So it's AMD 308. And Petresco also teaches this class, and she is amazing. So we wanted to begin today's presentation with a land acknowledgement. Cal State University of San Marcos is its surrounding areas is still home to the 6 federally recognized bands of the Hoya, Pala, Pauma, Pishanga, Rincon, Saboba, Luciano, Payom Chium people. Sorry if I mispronounced. We would like to take this moment to acknowledge and express our appreciation and respect for those groups whose homelands we reside and learn on. Recognizing that they are stewards of this land from time immemorial in spite of ongoing violence of settler colonialism. Given that we are not all together for this session, we invite you to look into whose ancestral homelands you reside on by consulting the resources we will be sharing in the chat as a first step in recognizing the resilience and strength of Indigenous communities and expressing solidarity with efforts to undo their intentional erasure. And I'll put that in the chat after I give my little presentation. So let's take a few quiet seconds to project solidarity as I share those resources now. Actually, I'll try to do that right now as I put this in chat. All right. So it's right there in chat for you to check out. So we want to welcome to our second session of the semester of Resounding Visions. This is a year-long series of BIPOC artists, musicians, and scholars who work at the intersection of sound and art to explore forms of cultural resistance and affirmation. The programming committee for this series includes faculty members Misael Diaz, Christina Dickman, Ana Louise Petresco, myself, and Melissa Taylor. We wanted to extend a very special thank you to Steve and Laura Wagner and the Epstein Family Foundation for this generous funding that makes these events possible. We also want to thank the School of Art staff, especially Albert Rascone here, for their support. Albert is here helping us along. We could not do it without him. I wanted to tell you all that, and I want to let you know that in lieu of using the chat to share questions and or comments with our presenter, we ask you that you please use the Q&A function, and we'll see it. The host will see it, and we'll pick out the different questions. I'm not sure if we'll close the chat. We might leave. I think we'll leave the chat open. Albert, that's up to you. And today's presentation by Charmaine will last approximately 30 minutes. She has some videos and PowerPoints and images to show. And afterwards, we'll be opening up for questions and comments, which we'll be reading out loud for our presenter to respond to. And that lasts another approximately 30 minutes. So before I introduce our guests, I want to read a bio. Charmaine Minniefield is firmly rooted in womanist social theory and ancestral veneration. The work of Charmaine Minniefield draws from indigenous traditions as seen throughout Africa and the diaspora to explore African and African American history, memory, and ritual as an intentional pushback against erasure. Her creative practice is community-based as her research and resulting bodies of work often draw from public archives as she excavates the stories of African American women-led resistance, spirituality, and power. Minniefield recently served as a steward, a Rose Library artist in residence at Emory University, and through a collaboration with Flux Projects, presented her work, Remembrance as Resistance, preserving Black narratives in Atlanta's historically segregated cemetery to honor the over 800 unmarked graves that were discovered in the African American burial grounds. She was recently awarded the prestigious National Endowment for the Arts of Our Town grant to present her Praise House project in 3 different locations in the metro Atlanta area to celebrate the African American history of those communities. She currently splits her time in residence between Atlanta and the Gambia, where she continues to study the origins of her cultural identity and indigenous traditions by tracing the ring shout. Off script a little bit, she is in the middle of curating and performing this big festival in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's amazing. She's a superhero, and it's our honor to introduce Charmaine Minniefield. Over to you, Charmaine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was such lovely. Off script. Oh man, it's really refreshing to join you all after being in the throes of a 2-month-long festival here in Atlanta. 2 months long, every weekend. We are in a different zone and district in the city for 8 weekends. So we're in our 7th weekend. So sitting down with you feels like rest to my body. I am going to share, to open my talk, the interior of our site-specific installation. The Praise House, it's a replica of a historic structure, and I'll explain more after the visual. But this visual was created in collaboration with a dear friend, Kimberly Benz, who's a filmmaker and documentary filmmaker that has literally taken on my invitation to create visual art through moving image and mapping that art onto structures that have historical significance. And we've done this in a couple of iterations around Atlanta, specifically in places that are experiencing erasure, gentrification, and the removal of people of color from their communities. So we've projected images in these spaces. And the Praise House is a project that we had an opportunity to construct our own structure and project. And we, in this case, projected on the interior. So I want to share those images, and this video is what you're going to witness. Is about 6.5 minutes long. So get cozy and enjoy.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're going to start that over.
Trials come and troubles rise.
We listened to that song for 3 weeks straight on a loop, playing over the African American burial grounds in Atlanta's historically segregated cemetery. We built a praise house, and I want to play the slideshow so you can see the structure. Praise houses were small wooden structures that were hidden in spaces that were safe for us to be able to express our African identity, our freedom. We had praise houses to replace the drum, which were outlawed because of the laws that wanted to dismantle us. In resistance to those laws, we built praise houses. Drums were how we communicated. They didn't want us to communicate. So the praise house became our communal drum, the floors of them. We gathered in praise houses in circle. And as you came into the room, you tuned the room with your voice. You became a part of the instrument. You became a part of the community. The room was tuned in what was called metered hymn. You heard actually Melisha Taylor, that's her voice singing metered hymn at the beginning. It's a long drawn out sound. Each word is extended. And that is what called the meeting in, the metered hymn. And we also tuned the room. We created community in harmony. And then the beat would hit and it would speed up. And the whole room of us now standing in circle. This was before pulpits and pews. The whole room of us would turn and spin. That was what you were witnessing. That was called the ring shout. The ring shout was in itself a form of resistance because we preserved our African identity by remembering ourselves, remembering ceremony inside of our bodies, remembering that movement was actually our medicine. We remembered that by moving in unison, by lifting our voices, by call and response, we were channeling our divine. Preserving our identity was also preserving our bodies, our spaces. It came from the same place that field songs came, and what eventually became chain gang, physical encouragement through song, through movement, through rhythm, through repetition, through ritual of all of those. In some spaces, it's called ashe, the will to live. And that will translates generation after generation and expresses in our identity still today. The second line band, the buck dance in New Orleans, the marching bands of Black colleges, liturgical dance in Black churches. All parading traditions come through the ring shout, an indigenous African ceremony when expressed out of the South. We had wonderful elements of connecting with the indigenous that were here as well. That expresses in New Orleans in particular. But the ring shout is what was that thing that changed the identity of Christianity. It did not express anywhere else like it expresses for Black folks, Christianity. That same ashe expresses in Islam in West Africa, where I was just able to live for 14 months during quarantine. I'll tell you that story. But there, where Islam enters, another Abrahamic religion, that ashe still preserves our African identity and changed the complete culture and identity and expression of what Islam is. And no, it does not express in any other part of the world like it does in West Africa. So the ring shout. This project comes because I was inspired by the discovery of 800 unmarked graves in Atlanta's historically segregated cemetery. Oakland Cemetery, in 1866, was ordered to exhume the bodies of 879 individuals who were buried in what was called Slave Square, in order to make room for white citizens of Atlanta. Those bodies were tossed over a hill into a flooded zone, and all of those families lost their ancestors. 150 years later, in 2016, through heat sensing radar technology, we discovered them again. The cemetery went about a restoration effort, and the Praise House in me was born. I wanted to remember them, but I wanted to use a symbol of memory, a symbol of remembrance. For me, that's the ring shout, where remembrance is resistance, resistance against erasure. I had once created a ring shout from footage that I had taken from a praise house in South Georgia. That ring shout was two-dimensional, and it was on the Auburn Avenue Research Library in historic Auburn Avenue, the King District, not far from the cemetery. That ring shout eventually became the Praise House. We were able to construct our own structure and place the Praise House inside of the cemetery. This project was presented by Flux Projects, supported by the National Endowment for the Arts, the City of Atlanta Office of Cultural Affairs, and also Emory University. I was an artist in residence at the time at Emory. I had a chance to work in their archives and connect the research from those archives, from the Langmuir collection from 1853, when the camera was invented, to the present, a collection of African-American images. I was able to pull from those archives images that were from this era of when these individuals were lost in the 1860s. And inside of the footage that you just witnessed, those photographs are there. I was especially interested in examples of women-centered faith traditions. The ring shout is that, women-centered faith traditions. I wanted to, in every element of the work, dismantle systems of oppression, patriarchy, racism, each economic injustice, erasure. So even as I used the archives, that was my effort. I ended up in Africa. I was in the Gambia, West Africa, continuing my research when the quarantine hit. I was stranded there for 14 months. And I had a chance while there to create an entire body of work that contributes to this work. I painted in indigo as a prayer to my ancestors, a crop that was also carried over, and skill that was carried over by our ancestors, indigo, and crushed oyster shells. In the Gullah Geechee corridor, much of the architecture of those days was painted with crushed oyster shells, just like the architecture is in West Africa. I painted in those as an ode to them. But while I was there, I painted images of myself in prayer, also performing the ring shout. Movement became medicine to me. Everything became framed inside of the ring shout. What were our ancestors doing by doing this act, this ritual? They were healing themselves. They were asserting themselves. They were affirming their life. They were resisting erasure, all of that. That all came over me while I was in the Gambia during quarantine, and people were climbing Capitol walls. And Black people were being shot in the street in through police brutality. And our country collectively, our world collectively was shouting out, resisting this moment of erasure. My body went into prayer, and I started painting in these images. And I also sought through my ancestral memory clues that I felt were encoded in my identity, like, freedom quilts had coded messages of freedom, leading us to freedom. I recognized that my identity was encoded with cultural references that would lead me home to my people. So while I was in the Gambia, I sought out evidence of my people. Where was the indigo? Where was the ring shout? Where was the gumbo? Cultural identity. And I immersed myself, I was blessed to immerse myself in the indigenous traditions that were there. And I had a chance to also record a woman performing what clearly is evidence of the ring shout. And you saw elements of her in that video as it just opened. She's performing a traditional Mandinka dance in traditional Mandinka garb. And the Mandinka dance, their arms stretch out wide and they flutter up and down, fast like a hummingbird. Their knees are high stepping, pow, 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 and they go faster and faster and faster. It's the most amazing thing to witness. Well, those who were taken and brought to this side, we were restrained. Our dances were more confined. Our same movements, but hands were on our hip. See if y'all can see me. Our hands were on our hips and our feet only shuffled. You can see that in the ring shout. Those are those images. So I was able to bring back all of those elements to the work. I intentionally wanted the work to be loud, to disrupt the landscape that it was in. We were in a location that was the focal point of the resistance during the uprising this last summer. There were Confederate monuments everywhere. There was a Confederate burial ground across the street, across the path from the Praise House. There was a huge obelisk there next to Stone Mountain. This might be one of the largest Confederate monuments in Georgia. And we were planting a Praise House right in the face of it. So I wanted to interrupt the landscape of that day. I wanted to interrupt the entitlements and the wealth of that neighborhood that had been, ill-gotten gain over generations inside of this complex history that is the development of Atlanta, that still cherishes in these spaces their Confederate monuments. I wanted to interrupt all of that. So I invited my collaborators to join me. I mentioned Kimberly Benz with the visual. Melisha Jesse Taylor is the vocalist, and the musician that worked with her, DJ Salah Anansa. We all gathered in First Congregational Church, a historically Black church that was built during Reconstruction, the 1850s. So the architecture and the history of that structure contributed to the sound that you heard. And there's visual of her at the end with the women spinning around her as she's delivering the anthem, is what I call it. This sound reverberated across that landscape for 3 weeks straight, every 6 minutes on a loop, and we were all possessed. Uplifted in the ring shout, remembering this collective prayer, this hope for freedom. That project went just as we hoped. By the time we removed it from the cemetery, tears, we didn't want it to go. 3 weeks later, that Confederate monument was removed from the cemetery. We didn't have anything to do with it as such, but feels a little spiritual to me. Feels like the work was effective in its intention, Yes, we got one down. The project has now attracted the attention and support of the National Endowment for the Arts, Our Town grant. Emory University, our humanities partner from the first installation, has applied and received the commission to do 3 more praise houses. And this weekend, inside of all the mayhem of the festival that I'm curating, we will do a second iteration of the praise house at historic Southview Cemetery. Southview was when, in 1888, African Americans established their own burial ground. This stunning hillside, 100 acres, African Americans of that day gathered their resources and purchased the land to bury their ancestors respectfully. So we will follow their migration with the Praise House project and reinstall the Praise House at Southview, where the likes of John Lewis, Hank Aaron, Dr. King, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, Julian Bond, Genevieve Hagerbrooks, those luminaries in Black history in this country are buried. So it is a great honor to be able to do that this weekend, actually. The third praise house will actually install at the DeKalb History Center in downtown Decatur to be a permanent structure which replaces a Confederate monument that was recently removed. This is the centennial celebration of DeKalb County, and they have intentionally commissioned this work to replace that Confederate monument that was removed. We're doing the work, And then the fourth praise house will be installed at Emory University in the fall as they dissect their complex history with enslavement and displacement. The project presented as a part of their slavery and dispossession conference this past month, and presented, in that setting. And it's in this space that we're even introducing concepts like reparations and how an institution can participate in repair for harms done. I'm a graduate of Agnes Scott College, also in Decatur, just down the street. You can see where the praise house will be, where there was once a Confederate monument placed there by the Daughters of the Confederate. Now, they dismantled the Klan, at least publicly they did. They no longer wear their robes, but not their wives. The Daughters of the Confederate is still thriving. They have a newsletter you can join. And they had an active collective at Agnes Scott College, where I went to college. Beacon Hill, the small town there, has always been I've been very interested in, because it was a freedmen's town that was settled in downtown Decatur, this hugely wealthy area that is not diverse. And Agnes Scott was founded after the Civil War, where George Washington Scott regained his wealth and resettled by creating fertilizer that saved the South, type thing. And some of those who were enslaved by him in Florida migrated with him and settled in Beacon Hill. Most of the population were newly freed slave and enslaved folks, now freed, and they created a burgeoning business and residential district. Over time, FDR came in, a few generations later, and leveled all of their homes that they lived in, and shotgun houses, and made them pay land to live in what became affordable housing, turned into, the slang term, the projects. And that's the only thing that remains of Beacon Hill still today. The Praise House in downtown Decatur, just a stone's throw from Beacon Hill, will be in their honor. And all of those who worked at Agnes Scott worked at Beacon Hill, lived in Beacon Hill. Columbia Seminary has already, just down the street, has already announced their reparations plan. If you are of color, you can get a degree. And we're in discussions now with Agnes Scott. I'm just hoping that this work sparks conversation around place and power, belonging, resistance, how we can use our music, our bodies, our movement, our traditions, our cultural identity, the act of memory, the act of remembering. All of that can be positioned to ensure a just and equitable future. Real freedom. Not that we are making these things up, like this is a fantasy. One day we'll be free, all of those something. And we can also get away with this, these artistic gestures. That's what, but the gestures themselves have power of that ensure preservation, but also resists erasure and moves these movements forward, these efforts forward, of real equity and justice. So that's my Praise House project. I'm hoping that my great-grandmother, Orly Irvin, who taught me how to shout, who's from Frankfort, Kentucky, and whose ancestors are likely connected to those who were enslaved by Emory, as they have shown research of that migration. Their name is Fuquay, and most buildings down here in Atlanta are, from the Fuquay white slave holding line. So those conversations, I'm hoping, also continue. I'm going to check on my time because I'll keep talking about the ring shop and praise houses. Albert?
We can have some questions in a moment.
Yes,
When you're ready.
I'm ready
for them. Okay. Okay. All the students, and Melicia's here as well. She got on the phone. I'm going to ask this question by Michael, student. Was special care taken when the building a praise house so as to enhance it as a musical instrument?
The care that was taken was, we took some liberties on the architecture in order to contain the visual. Otherwise, there would have been windows. We also made sure the floor was wooden so that you could experience the stomp. We have not quite played with the intention of the architecture around acoustics, but I'm happy that didn't happen because neither would have our ancestors. And a lot of that was sort of organic and it worked out, and just like it would have back then.
Great.
Good question, though.
Yeah, good question. I want to make sure, Melicia, are you able to say anything, or you can speak through the chat? She's got some amazing points here. I just want to make sure I give her space to,
Yes,
but,
yes.
but yes. I will, while we're waiting, I'll ask another question. Okay. Aiden asked, what you said about indigo really intrigued me. What significance does it have in African culture, spirituality?
Indigo was a trade skill that came with us. Indigo is also a practical skill there. So, fabric is dyed in indigo. There are indigo pits in Nigeria, not just in the Gambia, but indigo is all over West Africa. Indigo was also a fabric dye that attracted the Portuguese initially in the first contact at the island of Cape Verde. They initially came for indigo. Now it's, we have to remember that denim jeans is actually indigo. Heavy cotton, indigo. There, we call it mud cloth, indigo. There are, depending on your cultural identity and ethnicity in West Africa, there are all kinds of reasons and sacred traditions around indigo. In the Mandinka culture and Fulani, they dye their chins indigo. Don't say anything if you see me do that. In some cultures, they dye their gums. The women dye their gums so that it's framed in indigo. And I'm just looking forward to unearthing more and more the symbols and the way that they use and make the indigo resist the fabric. All of that is just a wealth of interesting, information.
Great.
I'm learning too.
I'll ask a question real quick. I'm amazed by it. I'm absolutely incredible work. It's so with your prayer houses, you've brought in a lot of elements from your ancestors, from the American South, both visuals and sound. Maybe talking more about the sound, how it seems it also has a very contemporary feel about it, especially towards the end as the rhythm, and how important it feels like you're also talking to the youth of the present. It's like and how important is that? Because I caught that, but how important was that to bring something and bring it to the present?
Yeah, so. That's exactly was our intention. Thank you, Gary, for bringing that out. That's the point of remembrance as resistance. Not the idea of pushing back against the erasure of the loss of memory is an act of erasure. And loss of memory, even in the sense of identity, is an act of erasure. And this work pushes back against that, reminds us where we come from. And in that, it creates a unifying act, just, in our contemporary environment, because, oh, wow, we all parade. Oh, wow, we all gather. Oh, yeah, we all move in circle. Our prayers are in circle too. Or our prayers are ecstatic too. Not just within West African and a diaspora, but worldwide. And it creates this sort of commonness, commonality among human, worship practices and elevation and vibration. But also it does that over time. So, our contemporary, all the way from twerking, I'm sorry, I'm from Atlanta, to house music. You heard a familiar house beat, familiar house beat. Now house beats, that's straight through the church. That was a fast clap in the church.
Yeah.
And all of that comes from that high level of rhythmic, repetition that comes out of West Africa in drumming, in the drums, where we couldn't have drums. The drums were everywhere. We eventually made drums out of everything, including the floors of our praise houses. So that the work is intentional about reminding us of ourselves, even our ancient selves, as being present today. Yeah.
I mean, I love it so much. I think it should take it on the road and open for Bjork or someone like that.
You know what? We're talking to someone in Harlem right now. But another thing is, I really want to go on like a preacher's circuit. You know, put the
Yeah.
praise house on a bed
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
drive it through the South and end up in small towns and do
Yeah.
whole with it. All that. I'm looking forward.
Yes. Okay. I have another question from a student. Students, you still have time to bring it in, and want to make sure Militia has space to, if she can, ask a question herself. Oh, yay, Melicia's here. Yes.
Can you guys
Hello.
hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yay. Now I'm a panelist. I was an
Great.
attendee for a minute.
Okay. All
Um,
right.
everyone, thank you. I just landed in Los Angeles. I have not been in an airplane for 2 years.
Wow.
And I am in my parents' car.
Awesome.
And so it is ironic that I'm here and Charmaine is there. But I am here because I'm going to be working with Jose Abad, who is our last speaker in this series. We are making a film for you all, and we will all get to watch it in December. So thank you. Charmaine, can you talk to us about why is ancestral memory important to Black American people? Why do we need to remember? Why is memory valuable to us?
You know, the praise house, this makes me think about the praise house that I'm about to construct at Southview Cemetery. Southview Cemetery has over 800,000, I want to say, was it 80,000? Some amazing number of, of ancestors there. The list of, you know, historical figures that have literally been the foundation of this country are buried there. And you don't realize it that, oh, it's just down the street, you know, like not in a history book, but literally just in my neighborhood down the street. At a time when it's you know, the country is questioning whether or not we should remember at all, if we should reflect on history accurately. You know, in an effort of some sort of collective effort of revisionism. You know, this work to me pushes against that idea too, because, you know, if you even break it down to intellectual property, or, you know, just like we can talk about indigo, that as a symbol of memory, because if you deal with, you know, slave labor, then convict labor, then retail and capitalism and, you know, appropriation and all of that is this mammoth system that everyone feels like is just, you know, unconquerable. There's no way that we could ever let, you know, reel that back once that beast is out of the gate. You know, if you really do map that, you know, where indigo comes from, where the labor and the intellectual property of that skill set entered into our economy, and then invest in the economic impact that has and is still having, you know, why can't those numbers be come to? You know, like, why can't we actually acknowledge that harm in a real measurable way and create an economic system that is the solution that balances that inside of our contemporary setting over the, you know, looking at what that impact has been over time. That to me is all based on memory, you know, properly assessing who we are and what our real power base is worldwide. And, you know, from our sacred objects that have been enthroned in museums that became literally the collective assets of a nation that now control the banking systems in the countries that they took them from. Like, you know, hold on, that's my statue. I remember that's those type of acts I feel like are important. And then just, you know, on an individual level inside of our collective conscious, our individual consciousness today, for Black people, for African American people, it is about, you know, connecting who we are to an infinite power that is from the beginning of time and not just from our enslavement to the present, or not just last week, but really all the way from grandma to infinite grandmas, and many of our spiritual systems are based on a cumulative ashe, generational intentional prayer for our well-being, and that's ultimately contributing to our evolution into at some point return to our actual freedom. So all of that to me is the path of memory, just like freedom quilts and cultural encoding. All of those are actually embedded inside of our actual ancestral memory.
What is ashe? I keep hearing you say this word. What does that mean?
Yes. Ashe is power. It's that's the best translation of the term in this Western limited tongue is power, but it really is the will to live, the will, or the Opal Moore uses the phrase, the zest of life. And so you can direct ashe, you can direct intention and the will and your will towards something. That's how we feel. And I say we because I'm representing my family line and my cultural network and community of people who feel this way, but it actually is a truth that most cultures have, and which lead them to feeling connected to a divine power that affects their existence and ability to resist oppression and overcome today. That all comes from our divine power that connects us to our ashe, which moves us forward, is what it is. And I think it expresses in different languages and different spaces. I was raised Pentecostal. We had ecstatic possession as well in our worship practice. That my great grandmother taught me how to shout. That's why I followed her path through Mandinka culture in the Gambia, and all of the connecting points that led me there. But we call it the Holy Ghost, so.
Yes, beautiful. Jeffrey, do you want to read Riley's question? I
Riley
can't read
has-
and talk at once.
Riley has an amazing question here. Everyone has incredible questions, so it's hard to pick. But Riley says, ask, the action of reclaiming honor through the Praise House project is incredible. Does your connection and history of your blood ancestors help drive your creative actions to continue this work?
That goes to memory. That goes to memory, the importance of remembrance, because remembrance is resistance against erasure as we move forward, erasure as we potentially could forget the past, but it really is about remembering my grandmother's prayers, really remembering her prayers. Like, I remember her, and I remember all of the love that filled the room, filled my body when I touched her and sat on her lap. And I want to tap into that memory and that prayer for her mother, and for her mother, and her mother's mother, and recalling that all the way back, and living the manifestation and answer to those prayers in my body today. And if I could harness that from the present to the beginning of time, what is it that we can do? That is really what our ancestors were harnessing in that small, tiny shack, beating that floor remembering themselves in a collective prayer, they were calling on that line to move them forward towards freedom. And our collaborator, Opal Moore, scholar, author Opal Moore, talks about it as a portal of infinite possibilities that was opened, inside of these spaces. And so we bring that now today at a critical moment. We bring that. And I'll tell y'all a little bit. I'm a public artist. I do murals. I do giant buildings on the sides of big murals. I did a mural right before going to the Gambia in Brooklyn, of Harriet Tubman. I had no idea I was doing it on Harriet Tubman Way. And there was all this beautiful history and resistance work that was happening in that community. It was being gentrified, and Black families were coming there and crying. They couldn't believe that, an image of all the little girls and all that stuff was being seen. And we knew the power of what it was that we were doing. I came back to Atlanta and I did a mural in a historic water tower of a ring shout gesture of little girls wearing white dresses, holding hands and playing Ring Around the Rosie. And I called it Cosmic Cipher. Melisha worked with me on that project. And in that project, there was this 15-foot strip in a panoramic wall about 150 feet around that I was able to paint these little Black girls in white dresses, so you were surrounded by them inside of the structure. And I always paint Ankara African fabric behind them. And all of these giant murals all over the city are these African fabric patches. And I call them freedom quilts. But this one was originally African fabric. That's how I'm painting it. By the time I finished the whole thing, I recognized there's a deity moving behind them, bigger than the view you're seeing. But we've somehow opened a realm that was not even intended, and here is this deity. And I think that these little girls are harnessing this deity or driving it. And that's what's in Atlanta right now. Like, that is in Atlanta. The other murals are big monuments to civil rights. Ella Baker on Auburn Avenue, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson near the HBCUs that started SNCC. Now we're invoking our ancestors, matriarchal ancestors, So by the time I get to Africa, after painting Harriet Tubman, I'm like, lead my people home, to freedom is how it all sort of came through my body. So yes, it does continue to propel my work. And then here we are, unbeknownst to us, the Confederate monument comes down right after our praise house leaves, a Confederate monument comes down and now ours replaces it. Though I feel that we're in a pivotal time in history. And I feel that the artists are leading the way towards equity and justice. We have a chance. We just had 14 months of quarantine and still with intention living a safe life, being careful of our lives, our bodies, our existence. I believe we've been in studio all this time. That's what that is. We've been in studio. And we are now connected inside of this moment in history where we can have collective intention towards justice and what is right, what is real, and what is actually freedom. And most of the projects I've been involved in have been like, whoa, it's been like that. And this series, Melisha, is part of, I feel like it's opening up your students to their own potential and power. I know it sounds a little soft and all that, but I've been consistent in my career all this time. I'm like 20 years in the game. I'm 48, y'all. And I still climb walls, but every painting, every project, especially when it's in community, has intention. And yes, my ancestors are right there. Seeing to it, and with ancestral veneration inside of West African indigenous traditions, you do invoke your ancestors to go to work. If they're here, if you're referencing them, then they are here to do something. And what do you want? That's the question. So we have a chance to architect a new world.
That's huge. That is huge. I know that a lot of this terminology I've dropped into the chat for everyone is rich and intense and deep. It's a lot more common in the East Coast, the West Coast. A lot of this language is not regularly used. So we're gonna deep dive more into this. We're gonna have an assignment. I want you to connect bell hooks. Charmaine, we're actually reading bell hooks in this class, and I did lift up Your Woman is Social Theory as a link and connection. A lot of this language is in our reading, but you're bringing to life all of these terms that we're reading in a very practical and visible way. And I'm so glad that you were able to join us in spite of your very, very busy schedule with Elevate. Yes, thank you so much for your time. I know we're supposed to wrap up, so
Yeah,
I just wanted to lift up our connections to the Womanist Practice, and thank you again for being here. Thank you, Jeffrey, for holding it down while I got off a plane. And
It's been an incredible honor. It's been so amazing. I'm incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Albert.
yes, thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Albert.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great questions from your students. Wonderful.
Yes,
right.
Great questions, everyone. So Charmaine is actually going to be joining Professor Anna's class. So we are going to log off. If you all would like to come to that workshop, let me know in email and I will send you the link. Otherwise, we are good.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Charmaine.
Let's meet again soon, everyone. All right. Bye.
Yeah. See you all soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.